Welcome back. Tonight, we're heading to Seoul, South Korea, a city that never sleeps, where neon lights blaze until dawn and the streets pulse with life at every hour. But there's something the locals know, something that taxi drivers whisper about during their late-night shifts. There are certain pickup locations they'll never accept after midnight, certain addresses that make even the most experienced drivers cancel the ride immediately. And at the top of that list? Cemeteries. Now, you might think this is just superstition, just drivers being overly cautious, but in Seoul, there's a reason for everything. And when it comes to picking up passengers near graveyards after dark, the stories aren't just urban legends, they're warnings based on real events that have left drivers traumatized, changed, and in some cases, never the same again. Seoul has dozens of cemeteries scattered throughout the city and its outskirts, places like Yanghwajin Foreign Missionary Cemetery, Seoul Memorial Park, and the sprawling burial grounds in the mountains surrounding the city. During the day, these places are peaceful, even beautiful. Families visit to pay respects, tourists come for the historical significance, and everything feels completely normal. But when the sun goes down, everything changes. Korean taxi drivers have a code, an unspoken rule that gets passed down from veteran drivers to newcomers. If you get a ride request from near a cemetery after 11 p.m., you decline. No questions asked. No exceptions. And if you're new to the job and you don't know this rule yet, well, you'll learn it the hard way. The stories you're about to hear aren't folklore passed down through generations. These are recent incidents, some from just a few years ago, documented by drivers themselves, reported to police, and shared in online forums where taxi drivers warn each other about dangerous routes and passengers to avoid. These are the stories that make grown men refuse to drive alone at night, the stories that explain why, even in a city of 10 million people, certain roads stay empty after dark. So what really happens when you pick up a passenger near a Seoul cemetery at night? What did these drivers see that made them quit their jobs, abandon their cars, or refuse to ever drive past a graveyard again? Let's find out. But I'm warning you now, after hearing these stories, you might think twice before taking that late night taxi ride. And if your driver suddenly cancels when they see your pickup location, trust me, they're doing you a favor. Kim Sang-woo had been driving taxis in Seoul for almost 15 years. He'd seen everything: drunk businessmen, young couples sneaking around, tourists lost at 3 a.m. Nothing fazed him anymore. Or at least, that's what he thought until October 2019. It was a Thursday night, around 11:45 p.m. Sang-woo had just dropped off a passenger in Mapo district and was thinking about calling it a night when a ride request popped up on his app. The pickup location was near Yanghwajin Foreign Missionary Cemetery, and the destination was Gangnam, a long ride that would pay well. He needed the money. His daughter's university tuition was due soon, and one more good fare would help him reach his nightly goal. He accepted the ride. The cemetery area was quiet. As expected, the street leading to the pickup point was narrow, lined with old trees whose branches created dark tunnels overhead. Sang-woo had driven this route hundreds of times during the day, but at night, it felt different. The streetlights were sparse, and the darkness seemed thicker somehow, almost solid. As he approached the pickup point, he saw a woman standing on the sidewalk. She was wearing a long white hanbok, the traditional Korean dress. Her hair was down, cascading past her shoulders, and she stood perfectly still, facing away from the road. Sang-woo slowed down, confused. Who wears a hanbok at midnight near a cemetery? He checked his app. This was definitely the right location. He pulled up beside her and rolled down the passenger window. "Excuse me, did you request a taxi to Gangnam?" The woman didn't turn around. She simply nodded, still facing away from him. "Okay, please get in," Sang-woo said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. The woman opened the back door and slid into the seat. Sang-woo glanced at her in the rearview mirror, trying to get a look at her face, but her hair covered most of it. She sat perfectly upright, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. "So, Gangnam Station, right?" Sang-woo asked, trying to make small talk like he always did. Silence. He shrugged and started driving. Maybe she didn't feel like talking. That was fine. Plenty of passengers preferred quiet rides. But as they drove, something started bothering him. The temperature in the car had dropped significantly. He checked the AC, it was off. In fact, it was a relatively warm October night, but the inside of his taxi felt like a refrigerator. He could see his breath forming small clouds in the air. "Are you cold?" he asked the woman. "I can turn on the heat if you'd like." No response. Sang-woo tried to laugh it off, but his hands were trembling slightly on the steering wheel. He turned on the heat, but it didn't seem to make any difference. If anything, it got colder. Then he noticed something in the rearview mirror that made his blood run cold. The woman's reflection was wrong. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost 90 degrees to the side, like her neck was broken. But when he quickly turned around to look at her directly, she was sitting normally, perfectly still, staring straight ahead. His heart started racing. He looked back at the mirror. There it was again, that horrible tilted head, that wrong angle. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. That's when she spoke for the first time. Her voice was barely a whisper, so quiet he almost couldn't hear it. "Do you know why I died?" Sang-woo's stomach dropped. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. What did you say?" "I asked," she repeated, slightly louder this time. "Do you know why I died?" He wanted to stop the car. He wanted to tell her to get out, but something kept him driving, maybe fear, maybe shock, maybe some primal instinct that told him stopping would be worse. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. In the rearview mirror, he watched as the woman's head slowly turned, not her body, just her head, rotating in that impossible way until she was looking directly at him in the reflection. Her eyes were completely white, no pupils, no iris, just blank white orbs that seemed to glow in the darkness of the car. "He pushed me," she whispered, "from the bridge, into the river, and no one ever found my body." Sang-woo's mind raced. He remembered hearing about this years ago, a woman who had disappeared near Yanggwajin. There were rumors she'd been murdered by her husband, pushed from Yangjinaru Bridge into the Han River. Her body was never recovered. The case went cold. "That was you?" he whispered. "I've been waiting," she said, her voice now coming from directly behind his ear, even though he could still see her sitting in the back seat in his mirror, "waiting for someone to hear me, waiting for someone to tell my story." Sang-woo couldn't take it anymore. He slammed on the brakes in the middle of the road, not caring about traffic, not caring about anything except getting away from this woman, this thing in his car. He threw the car into park, fumbled with his seatbelt, and burst out of the driver's side door, gasping for air. He stood on the empty street, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. When he finally worked up the courage to look back at his taxi, the back seat was empty. The door was still closed. The woman was gone. But on the seat where she'd been sitting was a wet imprint, the shape of a person, as if someone soaking wet had been there. And the entire back seat smelled like river water, that distinct, murky smell of the Han River. Sang-woo stood there shaking for 20 minutes before he could even get back in the car. He drove straight to the nearest police station and filed a report, though the officers clearly thought he was either drunk or crazy. He showed them the wet seat, the security camera footage from his dashcam. The footage showed him picking up a passenger. It showed the back door opening, but there was no one there. The door opened by itself, and Sang-woo had a full conversation with an empty back seat. Kim Sang-woo quit driving taxis the next day. He now works at a convenience store during daytime hours only. He never drives at night anymore. And he shared his story on every taxi driver forum in Seoul, always ending with the same warning: never pick up passengers near Yanggwajin Cemetery after dark. Never. Lee Min-ho was only 26 years old when he started driving taxis in 2021. He was working his way through graduate school, and the night shift paid better than most part-time jobs. Being young and skeptical, he'd heard the stories from older drivers about cemetery pickups, but he dismissed them as superstitions from a previous generation, ghost stories told to scare rookies. He was about to learn that some superstitions exist for a very good reason. It was a Saturday night in late November around 1:30 a.m. Min-ho had just finished a busy shift in Itaewon and was heading back toward his neighborhood when he got a ping for a pickup near Seoul Memorial Park, one of the largest cemeteries in the city. The destination was nearby, only about 15 minutes away, an easy final ride before going home. He accepted it without thinking twice. The pickup point was at a bus stop just outside the cemetery's main entrance. As Min-ho approached, he saw a young woman standing under the streetlight. She looked normal enough, maybe in her early 20s, wearing jeans and a black jacket, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked like any university student coming home late. "Thanks for picking me up so late," she said as she got in, her voice pleasant and polite. "No problem," Min-ho replied, relaxing a bit. See? Just a normal passenger. All those stories were nonsense. They started driving, and at first, everything seemed fine. The girl was quiet, but not unusually so. She stared out the window, occasionally checking her phone. Normal passenger behavior. But then Min-ho noticed something odd. Every time they passed under a streetlight, he couldn't see her shadow. His own shadow flickered across the dashboard as they drove, but the back seat remained uniformly dark. No silhouette, no movement, nothing. He told himself he was imagining things. Maybe it was just the angle of the lights. Then his phone died, completely dead, even though it had been at 60% battery just moments before. The GPS went dark. The music from his Bluetooth speaker cut out. Even his dashcam, which was hardwired to the car's battery, suddenly stopped recording. "That's strange," he muttered, tapping his phone. "What is?" the girl asked. "Oh, nothing. My phone just died. Do you remember the exact address? My GPS is out." "Just keep going straight," she said. "I'll tell you when to turn." Min-ho kept driving, but now he was paying closer attention. Something was very wrong. The temperature had dropped just like in Sang-woo's story, though Min-ho didn't know about that yet. His breath came out in visible puffs. The windows were starting to fog up from the inside. "Are you cold?" he asked. "I can turn up the heat." "I'm always cold now," she replied quietly. "Now?" What did she mean by now? "Turn left here," she instructed. Min-ho turned onto a smaller street. Then another turn. Then another. They were winding through a residential neighborhood he didn't recognize, going deeper into areas with fewer streetlights, fewer signs of life. "Where exactly are we going?" Min-ho asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Home," she said simply. "And where is home?" "We're almost there." But they weren't almost anywhere. They'd been driving for 25 minutes now, well past the 15-minute destination shown on the app. The streets were getting narrower, darker. Min-ho realized with growing horror that they were actually circling back. He recognized a convenience store they'd passed 10 minutes ago. "Listen, I think we're going in circles," he said, stopping the car. "Can you just tell me the exact address?" The girl in the back seat didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. It was flat, emotionless. "I can't remember my address." "What do you mean you can't remember?" "I can't remember because I don't live anywhere anymore." Min-ho's hands started shaking. He looked in the rearview mirror, and what he saw made him want to scream. The girl was still sitting there, but now he could see her properly. Her skin was grey, lips blue. Her eyes, which had seemed normal before, were now clouded over, lifeless. And around her neck, barely visible above the collar of her jacket, were dark purple bruises in the shape of hands. Strangulation marks. "Do you want to know what happened to me?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "I was walking home from the library, November 15th, 2018. A man offered me a ride. I said no. He insisted. I got in anyway because it was cold and I was tired." Min-ho couldn't move. He was frozen in the driver's seat, listening to this dead girl's confession. "He didn't take me home. He drove me to the cemetery. And when I tried to get out, she touched her neck. He made sure I couldn't scream." "Please," Min-ho whispered. "Please, just leave my car." "I can't leave," she said. "Don't you understand? I've been trying to get home for 3 years, but I can't remember where home is, so I keep riding. Different taxis, different drivers, trying to find my way back." Min-ho did the only thing he could think of. He opened his door and ran. Just like Sang-woo had done, he abandoned his taxi in the middle of the street and ran as fast as he could. He didn't stop until he reached a 24-hour convenience store 6 blocks away, where he called the police. When officers went to retrieve his taxi, they found it exactly where he'd left it. The engine was still running, the back door was open, but the inside of the car smelled overwhelmingly of funeral incense, so strong that the officers had to air it out for an hour before they could drive it back. And on the back seat, they found something that made them reopen a cold case from 2018, a student ID card belonging to Park Ji-won, a 21-year-old university student who had disappeared while walking home from the library near Seoul Memorial Park. Her body had been found 3 months later in a shallow grave inside the cemetery grounds. She'd been strangled. The killer was never found. Lee Min-ho never got back in that taxi. He sold it at a loss and quit driving entirely. He's now working at his family's restaurant strictly during daylight hours. But here's the disturbing part. Other drivers have reported picking up a young woman matching Park Ji-won's description from that same bus stop near Seoul Memorial Park. She always needs a ride home. She never remembers her address. And she never pays the fare because by the time drivers realize something is wrong, she's already gone, leaving behind only that overwhelming smell of funeral incense and the fading hope that maybe, someday, she'll finally find her way home. Choi Dae-jung had been driving taxis for 32 years. If anyone should have known better, it was him. He'd heard every story, every warning, every superstition about late-night cemetery runs. But Dae-jung had a practical streak that often overrode his caution, especially when money was involved. And on this particular night in March 2020, just as the pandemic was beginning, rides were scarce and bills were stacking up. When he got a request for a pickup near the entrance of Mangwon-dong Cemetery at 2:15 a.m. with a destination to Incheon, a ride that would pay over 50,000 won, he convinced himself that he'd be fine. "I've been doing this for 3 decades, he muttered to himself. "I'm not going to let ghost stories cost me a week's worth of groceries." He accepted the ride. The cemetery was in the northern part of Seoul, an older burial ground that had been there since the Joseon dynasty. The roads leading to it were poorly lit, winding through hills that seemed to press in from both sides. As Dae-jung approached the pickup point, his headlights caught something that made him slow down. There was a group of people standing by the roadside, at least 7 or 8 of them, all wearing white hanbok traditional funeral attire. They were perfectly still, arranged in a line as if waiting for something. Dae-jung's stomach tightened. A funeral procession at 2 a.m.? That didn't make sense. Korean funerals were elaborate affairs, but they didn't happen in the middle of the night. And why would mourners be standing outside the cemetery rather than inside it? He checked his app. The pickup point was exactly where these people were standing. His passenger had to be one of them. For a moment, Dae-jung considered cancelling. His instincts, honed over 3 decades, were screaming at him to turn around. But then he thought about his wife's medical bills, his son's wedding coming up, the rent that was due in 5 days. He pulled over. As soon as he stopped, the group began to move. But they didn't walk normally, they glided, their feet not quite touching the ground, moving in perfect unison toward his taxi. The lead figure, an elderly man in white, reached the passenger door and opened it. "Good evening, driver Nim," the old man said politely, using the respectful Korean honorific. "Thank you for coming to get us." "Us?" Dae-jung asked, his voice cracking slightly. "How many passengers?" "Just 7, the old man replied. "We're going to a funeral in Incheon. A family member has passed." 7 passengers wouldn't fit in his taxi. Dae-jung was about to say something when he looked in his rearview mirror and saw that all 7 people were already inside his car. The back seat, the trunk area, even the space beside him in the front, all of them sitting perfectly still, hands folded, faces expressionless. That was impossible. He would have felt the car suspension adjust to the weight. He would have heard them getting in. But somehow, they were just there. "Please drive," the old man said from the passenger seat beside him. "We cannot be late." Dae-jung's hands trembled as he put the car in drive. Every rational part of his brain told him to stop, to demand they get out, to run screaming into the night. But he couldn't. It was as if his body was moving on its own, following instructions from somewhere else. They drove in complete silence. The 7 passengers didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. The only sound was the hum of the engine and Dae-jung's own ragged breathing. After about 20 minutes, the old man spoke again. "Driver Nim, do you know why we travel at night?" Dae-jung didn't want to answer, but words came out anyway. "No. Why?" "Because the living shouldn't see us during the day. It disturbs the balance. The dead have our time, and the living have theirs. When those times overlap, unfortunate things happen." "What? What kind of unfortunate things?" Dae-jung whispered. "The living begin to see what they shouldn't see. They begin to remember what they should forget. They begin to understand that the line between life and death is much thinner than they'd like to believe." Dae-jung glanced in the rearview mirror again. All 7 passengers were now staring directly at him. Their eyes were clouded over, white and empty, and their skin had taken on a greyish tinge that definitely hadn't been there before. "We're sorry," the old man continued, "that you had to pick us up tonight. We usually arrange our own transportation, but times are difficult, even for the dead. Please," Dae-jung begged, tears streaming down his face now. "Please, just let me go. I have a family. I have—" "We know," a woman's voice said from the back seat. We all had families once too. We all had lives, jobs, people who loved us. Do you know where we're going? Driving him, we're going to a funeral, but not just any funeral. Dae-jung was crying openly now, struggling to see the road through his tears. We're going to your funeral, the old man said quietly. In Incheon, 3 days from now. Your family will be there, your wife, your son, your younger sister who lives in Busan. No, Dae-jung sobbed. No, please, no. You'll die in a car accident, the woman continued from the back. Tomorrow night, on your way home, a truck driver will fall asleep at the wheel. You won't even see it coming. Unless, the old man said, and for the first time, there was something almost kind in his voice. Unless you make a different choice. The taxi had stopped moving, though Dae-jung didn't remember hitting the brakes. They were parked on the side of a highway, empty darkness stretching in all directions. What choice? Dae-jung asked desperately. Stop picking up passengers near cemeteries after midnight, the old man said. Stop driving at night altogether. Go home to your wife. Spend time with your son before his wedding. Live the rest of your life during the hours when you're supposed to in the daylight, among the living. If I do that, Dae-jung asked, I won't die tomorrow? The future isn't fixed, driving him. We showed you one path, but there are others. The choice is yours. Dae-jung blinked, and suddenly he was alone in his taxi. All 7 passengers were gone. The car was empty except for him and the overwhelming smell of chrysanthemums, the flowers used in Korean funerals. He sat there for a long time, shaking, crying, trying to process what had just happened. Then he did something he'd never done in 32 years of driving. He turned off his taxi meter, drove straight home, and parked his car for good. The next day, Choi Dae-jung returned his taxi license and retired. He told his wife he wanted to spend more time with family, help plan their son's wedding, maybe finally take that trip to Jeju Island they'd been putting off for years. His wife was confused by the sudden decision, but she didn't argue. There was something different about her husband, something in his eyes that she'd never seen before, a deep, bone-level fear mixed with profound gratitude. Dae-jung never told anyone the full story of what happened that night, but he did start warning other drivers whenever he could. He'd visit taxi dispatch centers, post in online forums, even stop drivers on the street to tell them, don't pick up passengers near cemeteries after midnight. I don't care how good the fare is. I don't care how much you need the money. It's not worth it. Most drivers ignored him, dismissing him as a superstitious old man. But a few, the ones who'd had their own close calls, their own inexplicable experiences, they listened. They remembered. And they made the same choice Dae-jung did. The next night, exactly when the passengers had predicted, there was a fatal accident on the highway near Incheon. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed into oncoming traffic. A taxi was struck and completely destroyed. The taxi driver inside didn't survive. But it wasn't Choi Dae-jung. It was a younger driver, 28 years old, who had ignored the warnings and accepted a late-night pickup from near Mangwodong Cemetery. He'd thought the superstitions were just stories told to scare rookies. The funeral was held 3 days later in Incheon, exactly as the passengers had described. By now you understand why taxi drivers in Seoul refuse late-night pickups from cemeteries. These aren't just urban legends passed down to scare new drivers, they're warnings. Based on real experiences, documented by real people who encountered something beyond explanation. What makes these stories particularly disturbing is how recent they are. These incidents happened within the last 5 years. In a modern city with millions of people, extensive security camera coverage, and GPS tracking on every taxi. This isn't folklore from centuries ago, these are contemporary accounts from ordinary people who were just trying to make a living. Korean shamans and spiritual practitioners have long understood something that modern society tried to forget. Certain places hold on to the energy of death. Cemeteries, especially older ones in Seoul like Yanggwajin, Mangwodong, and Seoul Memorial Park, are locations where the boundary between the living world and whatever comes after becomes thin, especially after dark. In Korean culture, there's a concept called han, a deep unresolved grief or resentment that lingers even after death. Many of the spirits that drivers encounter near cemeteries are souls with han, people who died violently, unjustly, or before their time. They're not necessarily malevolent, but they're trapped, still trying to complete unfinished business, still trying to find their way home, still trying to tell their stories. The taxi becomes a liminal space, a vehicle moving between places, between states of being. For these spirits, it represents a chance to travel, to communicate, to maybe find some resolution. But for the living drivers, it's a doorway to experiences that can traumatize them permanently. The Seoul Taxi Association doesn't officially acknowledge these incidents. How could they? In an age of smartphone apps and digital tracking, officially admitting that drivers regularly encounter paranormal passengers would be professional suicide. Instead, there's an informal network, veteran drivers warning newcomers, online forums where experiences are shared anonymously, and a code of silence that protects drivers who've had encounters from being labeled as crazy. But the evidence is there if you know where to look. Police reports of abandoned taxis with no explanation, dashcam footage showing doors opening by themselves, GPS records of rides that took impossible routes or lasted far longer than they should have, and most tellingly, the sheer number of drivers who quit the profession entirely after just one night near a cemetery. If you're ever in Seoul and you need a late-night taxi, pay attention to where you're requesting the pickup. If it's anywhere near a cemetery, don't be surprised if multiple drivers cancel on you. They're not being superstitious, they're not being unreasonable. They're making a choice, the same choice Choi Dae-jung made, to stay among the living, to keep driving during the daylight hours when the boundaries between worlds are clear and solid. And if you're a driver yourself, anywhere in the world, and you get a request for a pickup near a cemetery after midnight, maybe think twice. Maybe remember these stories. Maybe consider that some fares, no matter how good they pay, simply aren't worth accepting. Because once you pick up the wrong passenger, once you cross that invisible line between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, there's no guarantee you'll make it back unchanged, or that you'll make it back at all. The taxi drivers of Seoul learned this lesson the hard way. They paid for that knowledge with sleepless nights, abandoned careers, and psychological scars that will never fully heal. Don't let their experiences be in vain. Learn from their warnings, respect the boundaries, and whatever you do, never, and I mean never, pick up a passenger near a cemetery after the clock strikes midnight. Some rides are simply not meant to be taken, and some passengers are not meant to reach their destination. Stay safe out there.